So one question that has come up with a lot of either our followers or just parents in general who want to, help and help, one, spread the awareness of domestic violence, but two, also it's like, what can I do? Okay, if we know that, in order for optimal development of my child's brain to be able to communicate effectively with itself, what does that mean? So what does that mean even for a child who's not in an abusive or objectively dangerous or lethal situation? How a brain develops for children is through play. So in order to get a PET scan that's like that of the healthy brain, where it's very active or it's communicating with all parts of itself, and so it's like the whole brain gets engaged, is by encouraging children to play and experiment with the world. So one of the things that I like to say a lot to parents that I work with is, have you ever noticed that when you put your child in a high chair, it starts knocking things off the high chair? One, it's doing that because it's an experiment. What happens if something falls off this table? Like kind of a very rudimentary way of figuring out how does gravity work. But the other more important thing is that they do it and then they see what your reaction is. And if your reaction is surprise or happiness or whatever, they'll do it again, because they're looking for that interpersonal relationship building with their caregiver. So the fancy terminology for that is mirror neurons. We all have mirror neurons. And so what that means is that when a child looks at you and smiles, you tend to smile back to the child. If a child's not smiling at you, you tend to smile at the child and the child will smile back. What's happening there is that there's a co-regulation happening, and there's an attachment and an attunement developing, where basically you and that child enter into a space where the child learns how relationships are. Why is that important? Our brains were wired for relationship. And so I always like to say that trauma happens within relationship, but it's also healed in relationship. So the number one indicator of success of therapy or success of a child is really having that one adult, one caregiver within their life. It can be anything, a teacher, a coach. That person may not even know it, but that engages in that safe relationship with them. So at the very basic part of it, sees the kid in the hallway and smiles at the kid and says hi, and the kid returns that. That's how you get to this development of a healthy, fully engaged brain, is allowing, one, for that experimentation with the world and objects around them, and also engaging in that play. I mean, little kids learn through play. Therapy for kids birth to 5, a lot of it is playing with the child, because you'll find out what's going on with the child because they'll reenact things through play. And so you can really learn a lot about a kid by watching or observing how they play, or the opposite, by watching or observing how they don't engage in play, how they aren't curious. So the antidote to a brain that struggles to communicate with itself, struggles to regulate itself, either through abuse or for whatever reason, the way out is through attachment. The way out is through play. The way out is through curiosity. The way out is treating the child as if they're this little human being in front of you instead of an object that can just be moved. They're a human being who has thoughts, feelings, reactions. They just, depending on the age of the kid, may not be able to say anything, but they're still having the feelings. And so that's where these mirror neurons come into play, is that a lot of the regulation a child learns how to regulate themselves happens through the relationship with the caregiver. The most basic way of thinking about this is when you have an infant, the infant will cry at any distress or any upset. So the kid may be hungry, the kid may need his or her diaper changed, the kid may be tired. All of those things are, you know, as we get older, we learn how to just kind of, oh, I'm hungry, so I'll eat, and that'll help fix this distress that I'm feeling. And so for an infant, they learn how to regulate that distress by basically alerting their caregiver. So they'll cry. So then the caregiver will go through steps. They'll change the baby, they'll feed the baby, they'll burp the baby, they'll see if the baby needs to sleep, they'll see, you know, they'll interact with the baby if the baby's feeling lonely. And they kind of develop this pattern where every time the baby cries, they go through all these things, make sure that the needs are met. And then sooner or later, the kid then figures out, okay, well, if I cry this way, I can alert her my caregiver quicker to that I'm actually really hungry and I don't need the other things, or I really need my diaper change, I don't need the other things. And so you can talk to parents and they're like, yeah, like that cry means this cry means that. And again, that only happens when you're in an attachment and attunement with your child. And so developing that attachment and attunement with your child then helps your child learn the stepping stones of how to regulate themselves. And so once you learn how to regulate yourself, you get this PET scan of this healthy brain that's fully communicating with itself. Whereas an abused brain, you may have at the more primitive part of your brain a want, a desire, a distress or whatever, but the brain is not fully engaged or activated enough, or struggles to communicate with itself, where then you don't have access to the frontal lobes, which could put into words what's distressing you. Whereas with the healthy brain, all of it's communicating, all of it's engaged. So you have a need, want, desire, distress, whatever, and then your frontal lobes can communicate to that lower part of your brain and say, okay, well, what is it that I need? And then they can come up with the words to say, this is what's going on with me and I need help. So again, that's for even individuals who are not experiencing violence or abuse or anything like that. The way that children's brains develop is within relationship and attachment, and then also play and curiosity. So allow the kid to, you know, explore their environment, play with things, see how things work. And again, it seems repetitive, like that kid who's sitting in the high chair and keeps knocking off the thing. It seems repetitive, but really what they're doing is building those neural pathways to make their brain be as communicative as that healthy brain. Whereas the abused brain is not as communicative with itself because it's not, for survival, it's not beneficial for them to experiment in that way. Think about a kid who's in an environment where it's dangerous, or they have somebody who is prone to violence. If they kept experimenting by knocking something off the high chair, odds are they're going to elicit a dangerous response. So they won't do that. And so then when they don't do that, they are not building those neural pathways within their brain to be able to effectively communicate.